Morning light slid across the glass walls of the downtown corporate tower, turning the polished floors into mirrors that reflected power, ambition, and quiet hierarchies no one openly acknowledged. People entered in waves, dressed in tailored suits and neutral confidence, carrying coffee cups that cost more than the hourly wage of the men unloading delivery trucks in the alley behind the building. Inside, everything smelled like money: clean air, filtered water, curated silence. Outside, the air held the scent of exhaust, cardboard, and long hours. The security desk in the lobby stood like a gate between two different worlds. It was a place where smiles were measured, greetings were selective, and assumptions were made in seconds. The guard on duty had worked there long enough to believe he could read people before they even reached the door. He thought he knew who belonged and who didn't. Years of watching expensive shoes step confidently across the marble had trained his eyes to notice brands before faces. Late morning brought a brief lull, the kind that made routine feel permanent. That was when the delivery truck pulled up. It was older than the luxury cars parked at the curb, its white paint dulled by years of sun and rain. The back door creaked open, and a man stepped down carefully, one hand steadying a large, carefully sealed package. His uniform was clean but faded at the seams, the kind that had seen hundreds of early mornings. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, not from carelessness, but from work that had started long before the city's office lights flicked on. He paused on the sidewalk, adjusting his grip on the box. His movements were precise, almost protective, as if what he carried mattered more than the building he approached. People brushed past him without looking. He wasn't part of the scenery they registered. To them, he was motion without identity, effort without story. Inside, the security guard noticed him through the glass doors and sighed, already building a narrative in his mind. Another delivery. Another delay. Another interruption in the smooth rhythm of executives and assistants flowing in and out with keycards that opened doors without question. When the delivery man entered, the temperature shift hit him first. The lobby's cool air wrapped around his skin, drying the sweat that had gathered along his forehead. He took a careful step forward, eyes scanning for the desk. His expression wasn't timid, but it held the quiet caution of someone used to being evaluated before being acknowledged. The guard leaned back in his chair, letting his gaze travel slowly from the man's shoes to the brim of his cap. There was an edge to his smile, the kind that carried amusement without kindness. In his mind, the delivery driver was already filed away, temporary, replaceable, someone whose presence would be forgotten by the end of the hour. The man approached the desk and set the package down gently, like it was fragile, like it carried more than paper and tape. His hands lingered on it for a moment before he straightened. He wore a name tag clipped to his chest, slightly scratched but clearly polished. It caught the overhead light for a brief second. The guard didn't look at it. Instead, he focused on the man's skin, the worn fabric of his sleeves, the dust at the hem of his pants. His mind filled the gaps with assumptions shaped by a world that sorted people by appearance before action. A small chuckle escaped him, quiet but sharp enough to be heard. It wasn't laughter at a joke. It was laughter at a judgment he felt no need to question. The delivery man's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Years of experience had taught him to recognize that sound. It was the sound of doors closing before they even opened. But he didn't react. He had long ago learned that dignity sometimes meant continuing forward, as if disrespect were nothing more than background noise. Around them, the lobby carried on. A woman in heels hurried past, phone pressed to her ear. A man adjusted his tie while checking stock prices on his screen. No one noticed the moment stretching quietly between the two men at the desk. No one saw the way one man's amusement rested on ignorance, or how the other man's patience was built from endurance rather than weakness. The guard reached for a clipboard with exaggerated slowness, asking questions he didn't truly care about, treating the process like a formality rather than a responsibility. His tone carried the unspoken belief that the man in front of him was lucky just to stand there. The delivery driver waited. He had learned to move through spaces that didn't expect him to belong. He had delivered to hospitals, schools, offices, homes with gates and cameras. He had seen people at their best and their worst, often within the same day. He knew something the guard did not. Every building held stories invisible from the lobby. As he stood there, a faint reflection in the glass behind the desk showed his own face looking back at him, calm, steady, unreadable. Beneath his name tag, beneath the uniform, beneath the surface others saw, there was a history no one in that lobby could guess. There were years of choices, sacrifices, and quiet plans that had led him to this morning, this package, this building. The guard finally glanced down, not at the man's face, not at the package, but at the small metal tag clipped to his shirt. His eyes lingered. The amusement faded, replaced first by confusion, then by a tightening around his mouth as recognition flickered like a light turning on in a dark room. But the moment of realization hadn't fully landed yet. It hovered there, incomplete, heavy with implications he hadn't begun to grasp. And just as the air between them began to shift, the elevator doors behind the desk opened with a soft chime, carrying with them the next piece of a story neither man could stop from unfolding. The soft chime of the elevator cut through the stillness like a signal no one had prepared for. The doors slid open with quiet precision, revealing a small group of senior executives stepping into the lobby. Their movements carried urgency, but also something else, alertness, as if the day had shifted direction without warning. At the center of them walked the regional operations director, a woman known throughout the building for her composure and exacting standards. Her presence alone was enough to straighten backs and lower voices. She scanned the lobby once, eyes sharp, searching. The security guard felt the subtle but familiar pressure of being observed by someone who could affect his job with a single sentence. He sat up quickly, smoothing his uniform, ready to offer the usual professional greeting. But the director's gaze passed over him as if he were part of the furniture. Her focus locked onto the delivery man standing at the desk. The package. More precisely, the name tag clipped to his chest. The guard followed her line of sight, the uneasy flicker in his chest growing into a tightness he couldn't ignore. He looked again at the tag he had barely noticed before, this time actually reading it. The letters seemed ordinary at first, just a name. But beneath it, printed smaller, was a company designation he had only seen on official memos and framed certificates upstairs. The parent corporation. The one that owned the building. The one that owned the security company that paid his salary. Time didn't stop, but it slowed enough for realization to take root. The laughter from earlier echoed in his mind, no longer harmless. It sounded reckless now, exposed. The delivery man remained still, one hand resting lightly on the package as if anchoring himself in the moment. His face showed no triumph, no anger, only patience, the kind shaped by years of watching people reveal themselves without knowing they were being seen. The director approached him with a warmth rarely displayed in the lobby. Respect radiated in her posture, in the slight incline of her head, in the way her hands came together before her as if she were the one waiting. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations softened. A few employees slowed their steps, sensing importance without understanding it. The invisible hierarchy of the building rearranged itself in real time, and most people didn't even know why. The guard's mind scrambled to rewrite the last 5 minutes, but memory doesn't bend easily. He thought of the smirk, the dismissive tone, the casual way he had drawn out the check-in process. Each action, harmless seconds ago, now felt like evidence. The director gestured toward the elevators, her body language suggesting invitation rather than instruction. She treated the man in the worn uniform like someone whose time mattered, like someone whose presence was intentional, not accidental. The package, still resting on the desk, suddenly felt heavier in the room than its physical weight suggested. The guard's eyes kept drifting back to the name tag, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less significant. But they didn't. They remained steady, undeniable. The delivery man finally moved, lifting the package again with the same care he had shown outside. As he turned, his gaze passed briefly over the guard, not lingering, not accusatory, just a look, calm, measured, a mirror held up without words. It was worse than anger. Because anger could be defended against. This was simply truth. The group entered the elevator together, executives forming a quiet semicircle around the man, as if he were the reason they had all come downstairs. The doors closed softly, sealing the moment inside and leaving the lobby with a silence that hummed louder than conversation. The guard remained at his desk, the cool air no longer refreshing. His thoughts spiraled through possibilities, each one heavier than the last. Had he misunderstood? Was the name just a coincidence? But the director's body language replayed in his mind, respectful, attentive, unmistakable. He thought about how quickly he had decided who the man was, how easy it had felt, how natural. The lobby returned to motion, but something fundamental had shifted. A junior employee approached the desk for a visitor badge, and the guard found himself studying her face more carefully than before, searching for signs he might have missed in others. Upstairs, the elevator continued its ascent. Inside, the delivery man stood quietly as numbers lit up above the door. The executives around him maintained a respectful distance, speaking only when necessary. The director held a tablet close to her chest, as if the contents mattered deeply. The package wasn't large, but it represented something significant, an internal audit initiative that had been planned in secrecy for months. A program designed to evaluate how people were treated at every level of the company's properties, from boardrooms to loading docks. Anonymous visits, unannounced observations, real experiences unfiltered. He had volunteered for the field portion himself. Not because he needed to prove anything, but because he remembered what it felt like to be unseen. The building's top floors were lined with glass walls and quiet authority. As the elevator neared its destination, the man adjusted his grip on the package, his expression unchanged. This wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. Down in the lobby, the guard stared at the security monitors without really seeing them. A single thought kept surfacing, unwanted but persistent. Respect should never depend on a name tag. And somewhere above him, doors were about to open onto a room where decisions carried consequences far beyond the polished floors below. The story that had begun with a laugh was moving toward something else entirely. And the guard, still at his post, had no idea how deeply he was already part of it. High above the lobby's polished calm, the top-floor conference room held a different kind of air, quieter, heavier, shaped by decisions that rippled outward into thousands of lives. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living map of opportunity and struggle, glass towers rising beside aging rooftops, wealth and hardship separated by little more than perspective. The delivery man set the package at the center of the long table. Executives took their seats slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. What was about to unfold had been in motion for months, carefully designed to reveal something numbers alone could not show. The company had grown fast, new properties, new contracts, new prestige. But with expansion came distance. Leadership had begun to suspect that the culture described in reports and mission statements did not always match the reality lived by those at the edges. Janitors, security guards, cafeteria staff, drivers. The people who kept everything functioning while remaining almost invisible. So they built a different kind of evaluation. Unannounced site visits, no suits, no prior notice, observers moving through buildings in the roles most often overlooked, real interactions, real treatment, real character revealed when no one believed they were being measured. The man who had entered through the loading entrance that morning was not just a participant. He was the architect of the program. Years ago, he had stood in lobbies just like this one, not as an executive, but as someone people spoke past. He had learned how quickly respect disappeared when status did. He had built his career quietly, moving through departments, solving problems others ignored, earning trust not through volume but through consistency. When he finally reached a position of influence, he carried those memories with him like a compass. The package he opened now contained more than documents. It held compiled footage, reports, timestamps, behavioral notes, evidence gathered across multiple properties over the past quarter, patterns, trends, moments that revealed more about culture than any survey could. Screens around the room flickered to life. Clips began to play. A janitor asking for help lifting a heavy bin and being waved off without eye contact. A cafeteria worker thanked warmly by one employee and dismissed by another. A receptionist who smiled at executives but ignored maintenance staff. Small interactions, easily overlooked in isolation, but together they formed a map of empathy, or the lack of it. Then the footage shifted to this building. The lobby camera angle showed the security desk from above, the delivery truck arriving, the man stepping down with the package, the guard's posture, the slow, evaluating look, the subtle laugh. The room stayed silent. Not shocked, not outraged, just quiet in the way people become when confronted with something ordinary that should not be. The man who had lived that moment watched without change in expression. He had not included the clip to humiliate, only to illuminate. Because the issue was never one person. It was a mindset that spread quietly when left unchecked, the belief that worth could be guessed by appearance, that kindness was optional when power felt one-sided. He moved through the data methodically, not emotionally. He pointed out where training gaps existed, where policies focused on procedure but ignored humanity, where leadership had failed to model everyday respect. He spoke in outcomes and responsibility, not blame. The executives listened, some taking notes, others simply absorbing the weight of what they were seeing. They had invested in growth, in innovation, in reputation. Now they were being asked to invest in something less visible but more foundational. Culture. The man explained the purpose clearly. This was not a hunt for punishment. It was a call for correction. Systems shape behavior and systems can be redesigned, but accountability still mattered. Actions still had consequences, not as retaliation, but as recognition that every role represented the company's values or its failures. By the time the last screen dimmed, the room felt different, not tense, focused. Plans formed quickly. Expanded training programs centered on empathy and bias awareness. Rotational shadowing where executives would spend days working alongside frontline staff. Performance reviews that included peer and subordinate feedback, not just top-down evaluation. Clear standards for respectful conduct, applied consistently regardless of position. And yes, individual follow-ups were necessary. The man closed the folder and rested his hands on the table. His voice, steady and measured, carried the final point. The way people are treated when they seem to have nothing to offer reveals more about an organization than any success metric. Around the table, heads nodded, not in agreement for show, but in recognition. Far below, the security guard continued his shift, unaware of the footage, the discussion, the policies already being drafted. But he felt something he couldn't explain, a lingering unease, like a storm that hadn't arrived yet but had changed the air pressure. He found himself greeting a maintenance worker with unexpected politeness, holding the door longer for a food courier, looking at faces instead of uniforms. Each action small, almost instinctive, as if part of him sensed that the rules had shifted, even if he didn't know why. Upstairs, the meeting concluded not with applause or relief, but with resolve. Change would take time. Habits were stubborn. But awareness had begun, and once seen, certain truths could not be unseen. The man gathered the empty packaging materials, folding them neatly. His role in the visit was nearly complete, but one step remained. A personal one. Because while systems could be redesigned from boardrooms, growth sometimes began in the quiet space between two people, where a moment of disrespect could become a turning point instead of a final judgment. He left the conference room alone, choosing the stairs instead of the elevator. Each step downward brought him closer to the lobby, to the desk, to the man who had laughed without knowing he was standing at the edge of his own lesson. And below, unaware, the guard adjusted his uniform once more as the afternoon light shifted across the marble floor, just as the next chapter of his day was about to begin. Afternoon light stretched long across the lobby floor, turning the marble into a soft reflection of the city beyond the glass. The rush of the morning had faded into a steady rhythm. Footsteps, elevator chimes, quiet conversations layered over the low hum of climate control. Everything looked the same as it had hours before. But not everything was the same. The security guard stood a little straighter now, though he couldn't have explained why. A lingering tension had followed him since the executives came down earlier. It clung to his thoughts, surfacing in pauses between routine tasks. He replayed the moment over and over, the laugh, the look, the name tag. Regret had a way of settling and slowly growing heavier with each repetition. He had begun noticing things he once overlooked. The way the cleaning crew moved carefully around expensive furniture as if afraid to disturb it. The delivery drivers checking addresses twice before entering. The cafeteria worker who always smiled first, even when no one smiled back. He saw effort where he used to see interruption. The lobby doors opened again. The same man stepped inside, no package this time. The faded uniform was unchanged, the cap still shading his eyes slightly. Yet there was something unmistakably different in how the space responded to him. A few employees recognized him now, offering small nods, not dramatic gestures, just awareness. The guard felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment he had both dreaded and expected. The opportunity to correct what couldn't be erased, only acknowledged. Pride wrestled with humility, and humility, for once, won. As the man approached the desk, the guard rose from his chair. The movement was small but deliberate. Respect, shown not in words but in posture. The delivery man stopped in front of him, calm as before. His expression carried neither resentment nor superiority. Only attentiveness, the same quiet presence he had held all day. The guard felt the weight of what had gone unsaid. He understood now that dignity wasn't granted by position, and disrespect didn't shrink just because it went unchallenged. Some lessons didn't arrive through punishment, but through reflection, through the uncomfortable clarity of seeing oneself honestly. He acknowledged the man with a sincerity that hadn't been there in the morning. No forced cheerfulness, no defensive justifications, just recognition of the person in front of him and of his own failure earlier. The man received it with a slight nod, not as forgiveness granted, but as acknowledgement accepted. Growth didn't require humiliation, it required awareness. Around them, the lobby continued its quiet performance of daily life. But for the guard, something fundamental had shifted. He understood now that every person who crossed that threshold carried a story he couldn't see. A history, responsibilities, struggles, strengths. Judging from the surface was not just unfair, it was careless. Upstairs, emails had already begun circulating. New training initiatives, policy updates, a renewed emphasis on respect across all roles. Most employees would read them and move on, treating them as another corporate update. But culture changes not through memos alone. It changes through moments like this one, where a person chooses differently than before. The man turned slightly, glancing around the lobby one last time. He had seen what he came to see. Systems were being adjusted. Leadership had listened. And here, at the front line where first impressions shaped daily experience, a small but meaningful correction had begun. He walked toward the doors, sunlight catching the edge of his name tag once more. Not as a symbol of status, but as a reminder that identity runs deeper than appearance. That every role deserves basic dignity. That power is measured best by how it treats those with less of it. Outside, the city moved with its usual urgency. Cars, buses, people chasing schedules. But somewhere within that movement, a ripple had formed. One building, one lobby, one moment that started with a laugh and ended with understanding. Back at the desk, the guard greeted the next visitor differently. Eye contact held a second longer. Tones softened. Assumptions paused before forming. These were small changes, almost invisible, but they carried weight. Because respect, like disrespect, accumulates over time. He would never know the full scale of the audit or the discussions upstairs. He would never see the footage or the reports. But he would remember the feeling of recognition dawning too late and just in time. And the man who had walked in wearing a delivery uniform would continue his work elsewhere, carrying with him the quiet belief that real change begins not in grand gestures, but in everyday moments where someone chooses to see another person fully. The lobby doors closed behind him, reflecting the skyline in their glass. Inside, life continued. But the measure of the place and the people within it had changed.